Just before we begin, this episode of our podcast contains a mention of child trafficking. You may want to preview this episode before sharing it with young ones.
Episode 1, Buhimba, I See You. Thank you for listening to Illuminate, a podcast by Hands at Work in Africa. Each year, as we approach Christmas, there is a season of anticipation and preparation for the coming of Jesus. The creator of heaven and earth come to us as a baby so that his creation would be reconciled to him. We call this season Advent, and during Advent, this podcast channel comes to you in the form of Illuminate. This year, we want to share about where we work, the types of communities that we are called to see Jesus bring life where it looks the bleakest. Just as Jesus came to bring life to a broken world, Hands at Work seeks out the most broken places in Africa to bring life to the poorest of the poor and most vulnerable people by way of his church, both internationally and locally. On our website, you can find a video with the same theme which focuses on a community in Zimbabwe called Tsatse. In this podcast series, we will take you to the Democratic Republic of Congo. We will visit 3 communities in the Goma area. George Snyman, a co-founder of Hands at Work, has spent a considerable amount of time there this year. We're about to hear George talking to a group of volunteers in South Africa on October 30th. Let's listen to George discussing the people and places where we work and what God is busy doing there.
Goma is on the border. Rwanda, Burundi, and Uganda, and Tanzania, and Kenya, all these countries are there. The DRC have got all the minerals that the world is looking for. It is the richest country in the world. It's the richest country in the world, but the people are among the 5 poorest nations in the world. The president will be so rich that he will fly in his own Boeing to the United States. But back at home, people were dying of hunger. We work in 3 communities in Goma. Our first community that we work in, it's called Buhimba. Okay? On the outside of Goma, it's just as you leave Goma. Buhimba used to be a refugee camp. When people fled from the war, they ran to Goma. But Goma people said, you can't come closer. So they started the refugee camp there. They were all from different places. They were just dumped there. And then they stayed there. So there's nothing that glued them together. Do you understand? This is where we work, our second community. So when we go from Goma, we go out, we go past Sake, then we go till we get to Luhonga. Then there's a third community. It's called Katembe. We get on motorbikes, and then we go into the mountains. But then we go up on that mountains. It's just a footpath. Okay, there's no roads. We go past 6 villages, okay, right to the top. The chief of this whole area, he watched us working in Luhonga for years. He became a very good friend of us. And one day I said to him, if I can work in one more place, what is the worst place? And so he took me to Katembe. And that's why we are working in Katembe. Katembe is so high in the mountains. At night, at a certain place in a community, I look down. And then I look right into the volcano. Apart from all the wars and everything, there's a volcano, Buhimba. There's no grass or anything. Everything is this razor sharp rocks that came out of a volcano. I don't know how the children do that. I don't understand it. That's Goma. That's a city where God has called us to work. So there are many, many different armies there. And so when the fight broke out this year, at night, people in Luhonga had to run. And so they ran from here to Sake, and then they realized there are bombs falling in Sake, so they ran from Sake to Buhimba. Everybody in Luhonga ran, and they were in a refugee camp there. outside, close to Buhimba. This refugee camp has got 300,000 people. The United Nations and World Food Program and all these people, they pleaded for food to the rest of the world. So thousands and thousands of tons of maize and beans and everything came to Goma. And it was stored in these huge storehouses. And then the people in the DRC was told, distributed to the refugees. I am not telling you what I read in a newspaper, okay? I was there every day. Nothing. Nothing. Other people, I'll tell you about the other people now, they stole everything and they sold it in the market so they could put the money in their bags. Their own brothers and sisters were dying. I'm not saying dying cheap. I mean, I saw people dying of hunger. Children crying until they die of hunger. 2 kilometers further, the guys are driving big 4x4s. You see how they take the maize. You see it. And they drive out. And there came a man. When he walked in, I could just see fear. People were just, because he just shouted, rah, rah, rah. Then I was introduced to him that he controlled that whole part of the refugee camp. You know, the refugee camps are broken up in parts, and different big men are controlling different parts of this refugee camps. And this man was controlling that refugee camp, and he was a pastor of a church. He took me to his church that was half built. He took me there. He said to Bindu, where is his car? Bindu said, he hasn't got a car. He comes here by motorbike. He turned around and he walked away. I went to the distribution point where all the maize was kept, under his supervision. A man came to me, he said to me, please, you've got to help, you've got to help. I said, I'm trying to, but it's tough. He said, no, go and tell the world. I said, what must I tell him? He said, they are stealing everything, it doesn't come to the people. I said, but this man is a pastor. He said, yes. Tonight you can come and see how the big cars come and they take all the food out again. So they bring the food in so that the people can see. They can tick, yes, the food came. The people that's supposed to get the food, they see the food come. And then that night they see the 4x4s. A refugee camp is a death camp. You know, there's no toilets, nothing. There's no water. The people come in there at night. They take the young boys, they kidnap them to become soldiers. The girls get trafficked for sex. We found the girl there. She was about 14 years old. Her whole family got killed in a war. She ran. She ended up in a refugee camp where she was a slave for the people around her because she's got no one to defend her. That day, there, we found her. When we saw how bad it was in the refugee camps, we said, there's no way we're going to leave our children there. They're not going to survive. So Bindu and Zawadi, they walk around, they look, they begged everywhere in Buhimba, where can we keep our children? So there was one church that was just walls. So they said, you can have this church. We bought lots of those tents and we made tents in that half-built church. And we went into the refugee camps and we took all our children and we said, come out. You're going to come and live in a church. And we started living there. We made a little thing for a school. Remember, they were kicked out of school. They lived there for months. When it rained, that's where we were. When the sun shined, that's where we were. We couldn't go out, and it was so dangerous outside. We kept them safe, and our team stayed there with them 24/7. But you know, they had to run from Luonga. They had nothing with them. And because of that razor-sharp rocks, their shoes were cut to pieces. So we went and we bought them cheap shoes, just so that they can have something on their feet. They were giving thanks to God. They were worshiping for hours just because He gave them shoes. Can you imagine 300,000? Do you know how many that is? Our team went in there and everything looks the same. They looked until they found every single child. Some of you knew, I sent you lists of children that were missing. We found every single one of them. We don't leave a child. It doesn't matter how hard it is. So then, to make things worse, after we've been for a few months in this church, the pastor came to me one day. He was looking for something here. I said, my brother, this is your job. I'm doing your work for you in your half-built church, and you ask me for money? He said, okay, you guys must leave now. Kicked us out. Kicked us out. He knew exactly what was going to happen to those children if I go back. He kicked us out. He said, no, the congregation has voted. Goma was cut off. No food came in. People became more and more hungry. Prices went. There was violence. People were fighting in the streets of Goma. It was dangerous for our service center. They still had to do Buhimba. They still had to go to Katembe. Very, very tough. And they had now the refugee camp to deal with. And they had to do everything at the same time. They worked 7 days a week for months and months and months. Never stopped. That whole Feeding Point, relationship group, everything were run by our children. Our children ran everything. They stored the food, they did registers, they took the kids to clinic. It was unbelievable to watch our children running a key point. These guys, they cooked, the senior guys, the teenagers who were putting the food out and cooking it, they eat last. And so when they saw there was no beans, they went without. They said, no, that's how it is. But we asked these children, can we bring another girl to come and stay there? They said, what is her story? We told them. They said, please. When I brought her into that house, they stood there, clapping, 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 hugging her, welcoming her, giving her blanket. When somebody comes, they stand up and they clap hands. Yeah, it's like God said, I see you. You are among 300,000 children. I see you.
Hey everyone, my name is Dan and I serve here with Hands at Work with my wife and our 4 children, originally from the UK.
I'm Sisanda from South Africa, and I serve alongside Dan with my wife, Brooke, who's from Australia.
But Sisanda, we had the privilege of sitting and listening to George share about Goma, and it was incredible.
Yeah, man, it was super inspiring. He kind of gave us a map of Goma, just the way he painted the picture. And what Uncle George did was kind of embody what Jesus did. A big part of why we celebrate Christmas is the fact that God of the universe stepped into our mess. He'd step in and be present and walk it out. For me, it inspires me.
So I love the way you draw that link. You said it brilliantly, where Jesus came to be with us, and that we're called to go and be with others. I think one of the things that I loved hearing is a huge generosity that the world in some ways has shown in getting aid to places like Goma on a scale in which the kind of Hands at Work could never dream of or imagine. Yet the difficulty when you can cover a whole lot of ground, but you miss little bits, but you make sure no one falls through the cracks, whether that's a Goga child or even someone that we notice. We're so personal.
Yeah, I think that's Jesus, where he says, not one of my sheep is missing. And between Uncle George and Bindu and the team, they carry that.
So I think, just following on from what you said, Jesus stepped in. There was a personal cost to it. Could we have sent aid? Could we have done those things? Maybe. But in actual fact, that's never been who we are.
you are partnering with God in this moment. You're not just sending aid, or you're not doing it from a distance. Your feet and their hands are actually getting dirty in the mud.
People partner with us, and they have a key role in what's happening here in Africa by praying, by fundraising, by supporting us, by sending resource. We refer to ourselves as the Hands family. It's not even just a group of people in Africa. We talk about the Hands family as a global family. Everyone plays a role in that. All of those roles are just as important. So if you can't come to Africa and you can't go to Goma, is there still a way?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You can advocate, you can pray, you can speak up on the realities that are happening here, and you can help raise funds. It's really important that people send money. Yeah, there's so many things you can do to be part of what the Lord is doing here.
No, it's good to sound. It's really good. And it's clear that everyone has a role to play. I guess what's maybe not quite so clear that we talk lots about here in Africa, but outside of Africa, is that our vision is to see the local church in Africa effectively caring for the most vulnerable. But actually a key part of our vision, and just as important, is we long to do that with the church outside of Africa. And so why? Because the biblical mandate to care for orphans and vulnerable children, it's not just for the church here in Africa, it's for the church worldwide.
Yeah.
Having had the opportunity to be in communities across Africa, one of the things we often say, we're asking caregivers or local volunteers, when looking to get them involved, we always realize we don't want something from them. We actually want something for them. It's amazing. It's life-changing for them to be involved in this ministry of servanthood. And it's the same message to people outside of Africa. It's not like we're just asking something from you it's good for you to be part of this, because it's not about hands.
Yeah.
God's vision and mission for GOM, for Africa, and to be part of that.
Yeah, that's true.
And then when Baba George was sharing about the young people running Care Point, that was pretty inspiring. Those young people serving and stewarding the food.
Yeah.
They had to spread it a long way to make it work. And they brought that young girl in and said, add one more person, welcomed her and cheered.
Yeah. And they actually asked for the story. What's her story? That Care Point is for the most vulnerable. And when you share the story, they're like, she's one of us. She needs to be here. Cool. Hope you guys got inspired. Well, this is going to continue again next week. We're going to look at another community in Goma. So we would love to have you guys join us and continue to pray with what is happening. Thank you guys for listening. Bless you all.